Alright, so today we build an e-commerce store. We all know that an e-commerce store is basically just like any store but online, and you can perform your transactions and still receive your products, right? We are basically going to be building this project, both front end and back end, joining them together, making a full stack. But at the moment, we are going to work on the NodeJs backend first. Let's dive right into it. Let us first of all begin by dragging this folder right here into this project, creating a new project for us. Now that we have that set up, we are going to create two folders. We are going to have our server folder, and then we are going to have our client folder. Having our server and our client folder separately helps us divide applications into two, which also helps us organize our JavaScript code in such a way that we can work interchangeably between these two sections or these two parts of the app. Inside, we are going to get into the server folder so we can start our server in there. So we do that by typing cd server, and then we get into it. Then we initialize our Node.js app, which that is our packet.json. So you're going to say npm init y npm init y gives us a packet.json, which should be found inside our server.js. Okay, so as you can see, it is shown right here. I'm going to change this to server.js and create a text. This is actually a personal preference. I just decided to change it. It doesn't make any difference whether it is server.js or index.js. I decided to make that difference. So now that we have this in place, I'm going to create my main server file, which I'm going to do by writing touch server.js. Then we have our server file being created. Now that we have our server file being created, we want to install certain packages, right? These packages are what are the things that are going to help us write our Node.js backend and bring everything together, just so we can work with our front end. But we are not going to install all of these projects immediately. We are going to install the ones that we need at the moment. then as we keep going forward and moving on, we add in the rest as we go. So I'm going to write npm i express. Express is basically our Node.js framework. It is going to help us write it is going to help us easily write our REST APIs for our server. And then we have Mongoose. Mongoose is also another package that helps us write or build our data documents in such a way that we can, since we are using a non-relational database with a document-based database, we are going to use Mongoose to help us write out the structure that we are going to have to be using to perform REST API manipulations between our project or our server and MongoDB. Then we have .env. .env is basically a package that helps us hide our secret keys or API keys, especially when we have to integrate the use of payments platforms. We are going to be given special API keys that is going to help us perform our actions efficiently, and also other secret keys like our JWT keys, which is going to help us handle authentication in the future. and a whole bunch of other packages. So now that we have the env there, we are going to add the last one at the moment, which is what? NodeMon. What does NodeMon do? NodeMon helps us start our server and listen for changes in the server without restarting the server. Then now that we have these 4 down, we can just hit enter and then watch them install. I'm going to skip the installation part of the video since it takes some time to get completed. Alright, now that we have our Node.js project set up, we have our server.js in here, we have the packages installed inside the package.json. Now it's time for us to actually initialize the server and get it running on a certain port. So in order for us to do that, we need to get Express package. We need to get the Express package, right? So we can do that by writing const Express should be required. It should be required from what? Express, right? Now that we have Express, we're going to put Express in an app. So we're going to say const app should be Express, then we initialize it. Now that we have our Express app initialized, we can now listen for the app. We can now listen for the server on a certain port. So app.listen. Then we have port, I'd say port 5000. Then port 5000. Then we create a function that allows us to know whether our server is running or not. So we have our arrow function as the next argument, and then we are going to say log server is running. Now that we have this, we can start our Node.js server. But before we do any of that, I just want you to cast your mind back where we had to install NodeMon, and I said NodeMon helps us run our project in such a way that we wouldn't have to rerun it anytime we make any changes, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the project with Node, right? So I am going to run my project with Node first so that you see the differences between using NodeMon and using Node to run your server. So let me just say node server.js. Then as you can see, we have server is running, but when we make any changes here, we do not see it being changed unless we close this and then we run again, say node server.js, before we see the new change, right? Then let's see what happens when we use NodeMon. So we're going to say NodeMon server.js. NodeMon command not found, right? So what are we going to do about it? We're going to go into our packet.json. We have our NodeMon package here. So what we'll do is we'll add our script. So we can come here and change this to start, and then we're going to change this to NodeMon, and then our main file, which is server.js. Then we're going to run this npm start script, right? So npm start, then we should have our server running what the server is running, right? Now that we have this in place, we would want to connect to our database, right? Now, for us to connect to a database, we will just have to import Mongoose. We will have to import the Mongoose package and just connect using our connection strings, right? But like I said before in one of my previous videos, trying to organize JavaScript code, making sure that everything is efficient, I wouldn't want to connect to my database in my entry file. I would want to create a separate folder and a separate file to connect to my database, so that it helps me handle database connection issues inside just that modular file. Okay, so before we connect to our database, I would want us to go to mongodb.com and then change some things to help you understand certain things and how certain things run over there, and then we'd see how we'd connect that using our VS Code. We are here now in MongoDB. Now we need to understand a few things. We need to make sure that we keep these things in our minds whenever we enter MongoDB to try to connect our database to our software in VS Code, basically. Now we need to make sure that we take a look at our database access and our network access. Now obviously, before you can get this, if you're new to MongoDB, you're going to have to create a new cluster. After you're done creating a new cluster, a free cluster, basically, you get to see a view like this, and then you would have to look at your database access, and then your network access, right? So we're going to go into the network access first, since at the bottom. Now the network access is basically a part where you can add IP addresses that can get access to your database, or IP addresses that you are going to have to be in before you can be able to use your database, right? Now, since this is a free project, we are not actually deploying onto the web or anything like that, we can just put in 0.0.0.0. That means it can be accessed from every point in time, right? Every part, every location, right? Anybody in any location can access this database as long as they have the database key, right? So I'm going to confirm, and then we have this. It's already active, right? So no need for it to add another one to it. Then we can go to our database access. Our database access it's like you creating a user that can be used to log into the connection string. Now, where from this connection string, if I go into the database right now, and then then I click on connect. I go to the database and I click on connect, and then I come and say MongoDB for VS Code. You can see here that I have my username here, and then they're asking for password, right? In a situation like this, what you want to do is you want to come to your database access and create a new database. So now here you're going to have your username. So I could say YouTube. I can say YouTube and let the password be YouTube. Right, and then I could come to this site and add in a row, right? So I can add a row and say that this row can be read and write any database, and then I can just add the user. So if I say read and write any database, that means anybody that puts in this information into the connection string, user YouTube, password YouTube, should be able to manipulate the database from VS Code, right? So we are going to use this details that we put in there, right? The YouTube password and YouTube username. We're going to use that inside our connection string. So let's go back to database and then click on connect. Then we have MongoDB for VS Code, that we can take this connection string, right, and then we can use it inside our project now. We're in VS Code now, and I think it's time for us to connect to a database. So inside our server.js, we would want to create a new folder, and then we name that folder DB Connect. Alright, so a new folder, and then we name that DB Connect or anything, but it just has to be connect to your DB or something, around that idea. And then we are going to create a file called db connection, or db connection.js. And then inside db connection.js, we are going to import the mongoose package. So const mongoose, then we're going to require mongoose from mongoose. So mongoose. Now that we have mongoose, we're going to create a function that would help us connect to our database. So we're going to say const db connect. db connect is going to be an arrow function that takes in no arguments, and then we're going to create a try catch block. Some people decide to use promises. I don't have any problem with promises. You can use promises if you want, but I would use a try catch block in my case. So we're going to say mongoose that we have here dot connect, and then when we are so basically this is going to be an async function, right? And then we are going to await mongoose dot connect, and then we pass in the connection string that we were able to copy. The connection string the connection string we were able to copy. So I think I copied it already, so let me just paste it. And then since we have our username to be YouTube and our password to being YouTube, we can now send out a message saying that, in case it is successful, we can send out a message saying database has been connected successfully. Some people just write database connected. So yes, we have this. Now we can't just leave this like that. We would have to come here and export. So module dot export, then we export db connect, right? Then when we get into our server.js, we can import this. We can import this db connect. There are two ways we can import it. We can actually import it by typing in and getting its path, and then the second way is, since it's an exported function and we are using VS Code, we basically just have to come and write db connect, right? And then it imports it automatically, and then we just initialize it, and then that should help us connect successfully to our database. So anything that we do, any action that we try to perform on our database would be reflected in the database. We can actually manipulate data to and from the database now. Okay, now even though we can now connect to a database and now manipulate data, write our REST API and stuff, if we would remember clearly, we talked about .env at the beginning. This is a very good time to use .env. Now, as you can see, this connection string is something that is very important and then shouldn't be left out laying around like that. So instead of putting our value in here straight like this, we would rather want to put it in a .env file, just so that we can protect it from being accessed in any way possible. This increases the security risks. So it reduces the security risk actually. So what we need to do is inside our server folder, we're going to create a new file and say .env, and then we're going to say db url, db url. Then inside this db url, we can just keep this. Can keep this URL, copy inside here, just put it inside here. Right now that we have it in here, all we need to do is replace this. You can replace this with process.env obviously, right? But we don't just put process in. Okay, so let's just replace process.env and then with the name that we had in there, which was db url, right? But it wouldn't work because we've not used our .env file or the env package. So we're going to say const, we're going to require it, so we're going to say const .env, const.env. we are going to require this. We're going to require this from .env, and then we are going to initialize it. So .env.config then now we should be able to connect to our database successfully. All right, when we come into our server, some people decide to put the port also inside the env and then create sort of a conditional statement in here. So we could do that too by going into our env and then writing port, and then we can just put in 4000, and then so 4000, right? We could so instead of writing 4000 here, we would rather use process.env port, right? And then we can say if we don't have that port to be available, we would run it on port 5000, right? But how are we sure that it's running on the port inside our env file? One way we can check is to actually use the string concatenation method. So I'm going to use the backtext here. And I'll say server is running on, then we have this, so we would say process.env.port or 5000. So if process.env is available, print that out, but if it's not, then give us 5000, right? So if I clean this and I try again, I should get 5000 obviously. So yes, okay, now we are done with setting up our server and connecting to our database. Thank you very much for watching this section. Please stay tuned for the next part.